The morning dragged on slowly as always, and the echo of silence on the farm seemed heavier than ever. I, Jack, a middle-aged man with a sad countenance, spent another day surrounded by memories of my beloved wife, Clara. The smell of the fresh coffee I had prepared mixed with the scent of wet earth as I watched the animals move around the barn. Their every movement reminded me of how vibrant and full of laughter life was before their departure. Loneliness was now my only company. "Come on, Bessie, it's time for you to eat," I murmured to the approaching cow. She looked at me with her big brown eyes, and for a brief moment, I felt like she understood my pain. Life on the farm became a monotonous repetition of tasks, and I lost myself in them, avoiding confronting the abyss of sadness that had formed in my chest. It was easier to take care of the animals than face Clara's memories, but deep down, I knew that this escape couldn't last forever. While feeding the animals, I noticed that the sky began to darken. The clouds accumulated, forming a dense and threatening blanket. A storm was approaching, and it wasn't just climate change that made me uneasy. The mood inside me reflected that heavy sky, the same weight I had felt since the day Clara left me. With a heavy sigh, I leaned against the stable fence, watching nature prepare for the storm. "It looks like time is not on our side," I muttered to Bessie, who, as always, just looked at me with an expression of curiosity. The wind began to blow stronger, dragging leaves and branches across the ground. The feeling of helplessness intensified. If only I could find a way to change this, I thought. The day turned into night, and the storm finally hit the farm. The first drops of rain were heavy and soon became a deluge. The rain pounded on the windows, creating a deafening sound that mixed with the roar of thunder. Darkness enveloped the house, and I found myself sitting at the kitchen table, staring at a cup of coffee that was now cold. The heat from the drink wasn't what I needed, it was the company I was missing. It was then that I heard a light tap on the front door. My heart sank as I thought it might just be the storm playing with the wind, but something inside me said I should check. With a little hesitation, I got up and headed towards the door. The dim light of the lamp illuminated the path, but the fear of the unknown accompanied me. As I opened the door, a wave of cold and rain hit me. There, in the middle of the storm, was a woman. Her hair was soaked and her dress was clinging to her body. The expression on her face was one of pure despair. She looked at me with big, scared eyes. "Please help me. I got lost in the storm." His voice shook, and the desperation in his words cut through the silence of the night. I hesitated for a moment, a whirlwind of emotions running through my mind. Opening the door to a stranger at a time like that could be risky. But as I looked at her, I saw not just fear, but also a fragility that reminded me of my own pain. "Come in quickly," I said, holding the door open. She didn't hesitate, and in an instant she was inside the house, shaking like a leaf in the wind. I closed the door behind her, and the storm continued to rage outside. "Thank you," she whispered, trying to catch her breath. "My name is Emily." "Jack," I replied, already heading to get a towel. "Are you well? I'll give you something to dry off with." As I reached for the towel, a strange feeling began to form inside me. Her presence, although unexpected, made me feel a spark of life in the midst of my grief. The house, which had been just an echo of memories for so long, seemed to take on a new dimension with her arrival. The storm outside continued, but somehow I felt like that night was about to offer me something I hadn't expected. An opportunity for connection, or perhaps redemption. The storm was raging outside, and the sound of the rain hitting the windows seemed like an echo of my own thoughts. Emily, who I had just welcomed into my home, looked as out of place as I felt. As she dried herself with the towel I had offered her, I watched her, curious and cautious at the same time. The last thing I wanted was to involve myself in more pain, but something about his presence intrigued me. "Thank you," she said, looking at me with a shy smile. "You were very kind to let me in." There was no way I could leave her out in the storm, I replied, trying to keep the conversation light. "You were almost soaked. I really got lost. I was following a path and suddenly visibility became zero. I never thought a storm could be so treacherous." "It's common around here," I said, trying to remember the last time someone had been to my house. "Nature has its pitfalls." Silence fell between us, and the tension in the air was palpable. It was as if we were both aware that there was something greater uniting us, but the past kept us from opening up completely. "Have you lived here long?" Emily asked, breaking the silence. Since my wife passed away," I replied, the pain of the memory almost suffocating me. "I used to love her company, now it's just me and the animals." "Don't you like company?" She seemed genuinely interested, and that took me by surprise. "I don't know. Loneliness has become a comfortable routine, I guess. But that doesn't mean I don't miss someone to talk to." I watched her closely as she spoke, trying to see her reaction. I understand. Sometimes loneliness is less painful than facing memories we would rather forget. Her expression changed as if a shadow had crossed her face. I decided it was time to change the subject, so I suggested we prepare something to eat. How about some soup? It can warm the body and soul on a night like this. That sounds great, she replied, and I got up to go to the kitchen. As the water boiled, the room filled with a comforting smell. Emily, in turn, sat at the table, watching the movement of the storm through the window. Do you always live here? She asked, her voice low, almost as if she was fearing a negative response. Yes, always. It's my home, even if now it's more a place of memories than of life. Sometimes we need to face what's hidden in the shadows to find the light back, she said, and her words resonated with me. What did she know about shadows? Curiosity consumed me, but I knew it wasn't the right time to explore this question. As we served the soup, I was reluctant to ask questions. Instead, I let the silence envelop us again as the storm continued to rage outside. But when we sat down at the table and started eating, I felt like there was something more between us. It wasn't just the storm, but a mystery that hung in the air. Thunder rumbled, and the lights in the house flickered. I quickly got up to light the oil lanterns I always kept on hand. I'll get some flashlights, I warned, trying to remain calm. I can help, Emily offered, standing up as well. No, stay here. You must be tired, I said, but when I saw the determination in her eyes, I relented. Okay, then let's go together. Light is good company on nights like this. As we walked through the house, the wind howled outside and the feeling of vulnerability intensified. We turned on the flashlights, and as I illuminated the room, I noticed that the light seemed to dance on the walls, creating shadows that seemed to move. Sometimes shadows say more than words, Emily murmured, and I couldn't help but shiver. What did she mean by that? I was about to ask when a new wave of thunder echoed, and the house shook slightly. Let's go back to the table, I said, trying to shake off the worries that were beginning to arise in my mind. I didn't know what to expect from her, but the connection that was beginning to form was undeniable. And even though I was reluctant to open up, there was something in his eyes that made my heart waver between fear and hope. As I walked through the house in search of the oil lanterns, I couldn't help but let my eyes be drawn to an old photo album that sat on the coffee table. The object was a relic of the past, a vestige of a life that seemed very distant. With shaking hands, I opened the album cover and was immediately transported to moments I had tried to forget. The image of my wife, smiling radiantly on a sunny day, hit me like a punch in the gut. Jack, are you okay? Emily's voice brought me back to reality. I saw her standing at the entrance to the room, her eyes expressing concern. Yes, just looking at some memories, I replied, trying to hide the pain that consumed me. What I didn't know was that that simple sentence would open the door to a much deeper conversation. Emily approached, curious. Can I see? Reluctantly, I closed the album, but her expression made me hesitate. Of course, he said, handing him the album with a sigh. These are some old photos. My wife loved capturing moments. She flipped through the pages slowly, as if absorbing every detail. She was beautiful, he commented, with a soft tone that echoed empathy. I watched her, trying to capture her reactions. Silence stretched between us, but it wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It was a safe space for us both to reflect on our losses. How did you meet her? Emily asked, without looking away from the photos. We met in college. She had a smile that lit up the room, always full of life. I was more shy, but she managed to make me open my heart, I said, my voice breaking. The memory of her made me feel a mixture of joy and sadness, something I hadn't felt in a long time. And what happened? Her question was direct, but there was no judgment in her voice. It was an accident, I murmured, closing my eyes for a moment. She was coming home and I don't know how to explain it. A runaway car hit her. I was so lost. Emily swallowed hard, and for a brief moment, I realized she was squirming in her own discomfort. I'm sorry, Jack. I can't imagine the pain you felt. And you? What brought you here in the middle of this storm? I decided to change the subject, hoping that she wouldn't dwell on my memories. I was traveling, trying to find myself, I guess. But the storm took me by surprise, she replied, but her voice was filled with something I couldn't identify. Find what exactly? I questioned, skeptical. There was something about his expression that made me uneasy. Just a purpose, maybe? Sometimes life can be really hard, Emily said, looking away. What she said resonated with me like an echo of my own experiences. Thunder roared outside and lights flickered, making the surroundings seem even more oppressive. I think we need more light, I commented, getting up to turn on the flashlights. As I walked past the room, I noticed her shadow against the wall. There was an intensity in his presence that intrigued me. When I returned with the flashlight on, I saw her looking at the window, her expression distant. "What are you thinking?" I asked. "About how storms can change everything in an instant," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "Sometimes they bring destruction, but other times, they bring new opportunities." The storm outside seemed to intensify, and the feeling that something was about to happen enveloped me. Emily turned to me, and in her eyes, I saw a mixture of pain and longing, as if she were fighting invisible demons. "Jack, can I ask you something?" She hesitated, but finally continued. "How do you deal with pain?" This question took me by surprise. "I don't know. Sometimes I just let it consume me. Other times I try to forget, but I never manage to. Pain is a constant companion." "That's how I feel too," she said, and for a moment, there was a connection that went beyond words. It was as if we were sharing a burden, even if for a brief moment. The storm raged outside, and a light flickered before going out completely, plunging us into total darkness. Silence settled in, and I felt my heart speed up. "Emily?" I called, but darkness enveloped me and I couldn't see anything. "I'm here," she replied, her voice echoing in the darkness. The fear and tension between us was palpable, and I realized that, in that moment, we were more connected than ever. The darkness in the house seemed to intensify with the storm outside. Shadows danced on the walls, and the only light came from a small lamp that I turned on. I looked at Emily, who was sitting at the table, her expression somewhat distant. The idea of playing a quiz game seemed like a way to break the ice and maybe even ease the tension that was between us. "How about we play a quiz game?" I suggested, trying to hide the nervousness in my voice. She hesitated for a moment, but then nodded. "Could it be? But you first. Ask something." "Okay," I started nervously. "If you could travel anywhere in the world, where would you go?" Emily thought for a moment. "I would go to the mountains of Peru. I always dreamed of seeing Machu Picchu." "And you?" "I've always wanted to visit Tuscany," I replied, feeling a pang of longing for the life I used to have. "The beauty of the countryside, the vineyards." Emily smiled, but soon her expression changed. "Life is full of things we can't have, isn't it?" "Yes, it is," I agreed, sensing she was referring to something deeper. "Now it's your turn to ask." She crossed her arms on the table, thoughtful. "What was your happiest memory with your wife?" The mere sound of her name made my heart clench. "We used to dance in the kitchen. She loved cooking and I just tried not to step on her toes. But those moments were magical." "That sounds beautiful," Emily said, her voice low and soft. "She was a special woman." "It was," I replied, a lump forming in my throat. "And I lost everything." The silence that followed was heavy, and I realized that the storm outside the house seemed to have intensified, as did the storm inside me. Emily looked out the window, where lightning streaked across the dark sky. "You miss her every day, don't you?" "Yes, and loneliness, it's a difficult burden to bear," I confessed, feeling a vulnerability I didn't usually show. "What about you, Emily? Have you ever felt like you missed something important?" She hesitated, her eyes glistening with tears that she seemed to be trying to hide. "I also lost someone dear." "An accident? Sorry," I mumbled, feeling a tightness in my chest. "I didn't know." "No need to apologize," she said, her voice almost breaking. "It's difficult to talk about it. I don't know if I'm ready to tell the story." "I understand. You don't have to share anything you don't want to," I replied, trying to be understanding. But the need to know more about her consumed me. "But if you want, I'm here to listen." She looked at me, and for a moment, it seemed like the storm around us had abated. A part of me always felt like I should have done more. That I could have avoided. The storm, which now seemed like a raging force of nature, echoed his sentiments. I felt like his words held a weight that I couldn't fully understand. "What happened?" I asked, curiosity getting the best of me. "It was a car accident," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was with them." Guilt consumed me, and for a long time I couldn't forgive myself. The echo of her words reverberated in the room, and I watched her in silence. There was a connection between us, an identification in our pain, but there was also a chasm that I didn't know how to cross. Thunder roared outside and the lights flickered once more. "Let's try to forget about this for a moment," I suggested, trying to change the subject. "What would you say if I asked you what your biggest dream is?" She smiled, a little more relaxed. "Dreams? I dream of finding a place where I can be free from guilt. A place where I can start again." "That's a beautiful dream," I replied, admiring his courage. "Maybe we can find that place together, even if it's just for one night." As we spoke, I looked out the window and saw the damage the storm was causing to the property. The rain fell in torrents and the winds howled as if they wanted to tear everything from the ground. "I think the storm is getting worse," I commented, standing up to take a closer look. "Jack, be careful," Emily exclaimed, her concern evident. "You shouldn't go out alone in a storm like that." "I just want to check the damage," I replied, trying to calm her. But before I could take a step, the house creaked and I realized that the storm wasn't just an outside force. It had become a metaphor for the internal conflicts we both faced. The rain fell furiously, and the sound of thunder echoed like a distant roar. I was in the kitchen trying to collect my thoughts while looking out the window for some clarity. The flash of lightning illuminated the darkness, and it was at that moment that Emily's scream cut through the air, making my heart race. I ran into the room without thinking twice, worried about what could have happened. As I entered, I saw Emily standing still, her eyes fixed on something in the corner of the room. What could be so terrifying? My heart sped up even more. "Emily, what's wrong? What's going on?" I asked as I turned on the flashlight I had left on the table. The dim light didn't illuminate much, but enough for me to realize she was looking at a blanket on the floor. "Jack, there's something there," she stammered, her voice shaking. I approached slowly, the protective instinct taking over me. As I lifted the blanket, a wave of emotions invaded me. It was a portrait of my wife, which I had kept in a corner of the room, covered by the veil of dust and mourning. The image of her, radiant and full of life, hit me like a punch in the stomach. This is a portrait of my wife, Clara," I said, my voice breaking. I looked at Emily, who was pale and visibly shaken. "Why are you so scared?" She didn't respond immediately. Instead, a tear ran down her face and in an unexpected move she fainted. "Emily," I shouted, running towards her. Worry washed over me as I lifted her and placed her gently on the couch. What was happening? Why did she faint when she saw the photo? The atmosphere was heavy, and the sound of the storm seemed to intensify the tension. I watched her, waiting for her to come to her senses. After a few moments that felt like an eternity, his eyes slowly opened. "What happened?" she muttered, confused. "Where am I?" "You passed out," I replied, relieved to see her awake but still very worried. "What was going on? What did you see that scared you so?" She hesitated, looking at the ceiling as if searching for the right words. "Sorry, I don't know how to explain it. I saw your wife and, did you know her?" I interrupted, disbelief taking over me. "How did you know Clara?" Emily's gaze changed, and I realized there was something much deeper in her expression. "Not directly, but I was involved in an accident. An accident that took her life." Her words resonated in the room like thunder, and the air seemed to thicken. "What are you saying? Were you involved in the accident that killed Clara?" Anger and confusion began to mix in my chest. "You're telling me I'm the reason you're here, Jack. The reason you isolated yourself." The guilt consumed me and I didn't know how to face it. "I'm as guilty as you might think." "You don't know what I think," I replied, voice raised. "You have no idea what I went through, what I lost. Clara was everything to me." Emily flinched, tears streaming down her face. I know, and I'm sorry. I didn't mean for this to happen. It was a night like tonight and I don't know how to explain it, but..." "You don't have to explain anything," I said, feeling the anger rising once again. But as I looked at her, I saw not just a stranger but a broken woman just like me. "You're hurt too, aren't you?" She nodded, the pain in her eyes mirroring my own. "I carried this guilt for years. I ran away thinking that if I hid, the pain would go away. But in fact, it only grew." The storm outside continued to rage, but somehow it seemed like the noise was moving away. I was beginning to understand that there was more connection between us than I could have imagined. "Emily," I started, but the words caught in my throat. What did I really want to say? That I hated her? Or that there was something about her pain that mirrored mine? "I just wanted to redeem myself," she whispered as if reading my thoughts. "I didn't know you were here, that you were suffering. I just wanted..." "What did you want?" I asked, tone softer now. "What did you want, Emily?" "I just wanted to find peace. For me and for you." And at that moment I realized that the storm was just beginning to calm, just like us. The raindrops still pattered on the windows, but the atmosphere in the room was now completely different. The air was heavy with the weight of the revelations that had just occurred. I looked at Emily, who was still catching her breath after fainting. What she had said echoed in my mind, like thunder that wouldn't go out. I was one of the people in the accident," she had confessed. What did this mean? How could she be so close to my world and at the same time so far away? Are you saying you were there?" My voice was lower than I expected, almost a whisper. Emily nodded slowly, her eyes teary. I didn't want that to happen. I never knew that. How could you not know? You were with them. I couldn't contain the anger that welled up inside me. It was a mixture of pain and confusion. You can't just walk into my life like that and expect me to understand you. Jack, she exclaimed, and I noticed her voice was shaking. Guilt consumed me. I carried this for years. When I heard about the accident, I couldn't deal. I ran away to hide. But I could never escape the truth. I got up, starting to pace back and forth. The storm outside seemed to have found an echo in my soul. And you thought coming here to my house was the solution? That I would just ignore who you are? No, it wasn't that. I just wanted to hide. But when the storm started, I didn't know you were Jack, the widower. She looked at me, her eyes intense. I didn't know you were the man I hurt. Her words cut like a dagger. The pain of the past and the anger of the present were tangled into one overwhelming feeling. So, did you know who I was before you came in here? Did you take advantage? I said, voice thick with contempt. No, I didn't know, Jack. I just needed shelter. And when you opened the door, I couldn't believe it. She approached, hands raised in a gesture of submission. Please don't judge me for this. I'm not the person you think I am. Silence settled between us, with the sound of the storm as an unsettling backdrop. I watched her, trying to decipher her intentions. She seemed so vulnerable, but the truth was a shadow that hovered between us. How can you expect me to forgive you? How can I trust you again? I'm not asking you to forgive me immediately. I understand this takes time, she admitted, voice soft. But I'm here, willing to face it. I want to help you find some peace, just as I hope to find mine. Those words touched me in a way I didn't expect. It was as if, in the midst of the storm, a ray of light had pierced the darkness. Do you really want this? I asked, incredulity evident in my voice. Are you willing to face what you did? Yes, she said firmly. I want to do whatever it takes to redeem my past. I don't want you to carry this pain alone. I can't change what happened, but I can try to make something good out of it. I looked into her eyes, searching for any sign of dishonesty. But what I found was a sincerity that disarmed me. The storm was beginning to subside outside, and I realized that, somehow, our conversation was unraveling the knots of pain that I carried. So what do you suggest? I asked, anger giving way to a desire for understanding. We can start talking about what happened piece by piece. I want to tell my story and you can tell yours. And maybe, just maybe, we can find a way forward, she proposed, hope lighting up her face. I took a deep breath, a wave of emotion stirring inside me. I don't know if I'm ready for this, but maybe it's time to start letting go of the past, I murmured, the storm finally dissipating. As the sky began to lighten, I realized that the connection we formed that night could be the first step toward the healing we both needed. The idea of going out together to see the sunrise seemed like a new possibility, a new beginning. And at that moment, I decided I was willing to try.